There's a chair sitting in a museum in Cairo. It's made of wood. It has no screws, no nails, no metal of any kind. And it's over 3,000 years old. It doesn't wobble. It doesn't creak. The joints are still tight. 3,000 years. And somewhere in your garage right now, there's probably a project you started that didn't turn out the way you pictured it. Maybe a shelf that leans slightly, a table that rocks, a joint that looked right on paper but just didn't hold. That's not a coincidence. That's a gap. A gap between how furniture used to be built and how most of us were taught to build it. Today I want to close that gap. Just a little. Because there's one technique, ancient, almost forgotten, and almost never taught anymore, that changes the way wood behaves under stress. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a joint the same way again. Let's start with something honest. Screws are convenient. Nobody's going to argue that. You drive one in, things hold. Together, you move on. And for a lot of projects, that's perfectly fine. But screws work by force. They grip by tension. And wood is a living material. It expands, it contracts, it moves with humidity and temperature. Over months, over years, that tension becomes a problem. The wood shifts, the screw stays, and slowly, the joint fails. The old craftsmen knew this, not because someone told them, because they had no choice but to figure it out. They didn't have screws. They didn't have power. Tools. They had wood, chisels, and time. And what they discovered, by necessity, was something that modern woodworking mostly walked away from. They discovered that wood is strongest when it holds itself. The technique is called the Mortise and Tenon joint. It's been documented for at least 7,000 years. We found it in ancient Egyptian furniture, in Japanese temple architecture, in medieval European chairs that are still bearing weight today, centuries after the people who built them are gone. The idea is simple, but the engineering behind it is remarkable. Instead of driving something into the wood to force it together, you shape the wood itself to lock. You carve a cavity. That's the mortise. You shape a projection on the mating piece. That's the tenon. The tenon fits into the mortise. And when it's done with precision, the joint doesn't just hold. It tightens under load. Think about that for a second. The heavier the pressure, the stronger the connection becomes. That is the opposite of what a screw does. Studies on furniture joinery show that a properly cut mortise and tenon joint can withstand 2 to 3 times more racking force than a screwed connection of the same dimension. Racking force is the sideways stress, the kind that happens every time someone leans back in a chair or a table gets pushed across a room. It's the stress that makes modern furniture wobble. And it's exactly the stress that this joint was designed to handle. Now, I want to pause here for just a second. Because if you're the kind of person who watches a video like this, who actually cares about why joints fail, about the history behind the craft, about building things that last, then you probably know what it feels like to follow a plan that let you down. A plan that looked complete, had decent photos, seemed legit, and then somewhere around step 4 or 5, left you stranded. A measurement that didn't add up. A step that skipped the hard part. Lumber that became expensive kindling. If that's ever happened to you, I'm not going to tell you there's a magic fix. But I'll say this. A lot of woodworkers I know, when they finally got access to plans that were actually built and tested before being published, the whole experience of being in the shop changed. Less frustration, more finishing. There's a link in the comments if you're curious. No pressure. Just worth a look if that resonates. Back to the joint. The reason the mortise and tenon works comes down to surface area and geometry. A screw makes contact along a thin spiral thread. A mortise and tenon makes full contact across an entire face, sometimes 4 faces, of interlocking wood. The glue surface is dramatically larger. The mechanical resistance is dramatically higher. And because the wood is shaping around itself, the natural grain direction is preserved, not interrupted. When a screw enters wood, it cuts across the grain. That's a stress point from the moment you drive it in. A mortise and tenon follows the grain. It works with the structure of the material, not against it. This is why a Windsor chair from 1780 can still hold a grown adult without complaint, and why a flat-pack bookshelf from last decade is already soft at the corners. Cutting a clean mortise and tenon is not complicated, but it does require precision. The tenon should fit snugly, not loose, not forced. If you can push it in with light hand pressure and it has no play, you're close. Tvanedi. Cheeks of the tenon should be smooth and flat. The mortise walls should be square and consistent in depth. The proportions matter too. A general rule, the tenon thickness should be roughly 1/3 of the total thickness of the piece it's cut from. So if you're working with stock that's 1.5 inches thick, your tenon should be about 1/2 inch. That ratio balances strength with enough material on either side of the mortise to resist splitting. For a chair rail going into a leg, your tenon length should be at least 1 inch, ideally closer to 1.5 inches. The longer the tenon, the more resistance you get against the racking forces we talked about. And when you add glue, hide glue traditionally, though modern PVA works fine, you're not relying on the glue alone. The mechanical lock does most of the work. The glue is insurance. There's something that happens the first time you cut a mortise and tenon joint correctly. When that tenon slides in, flush and clean, with just the right amount of resistance. No gap, no wobble, just wood fitting wood the way it was meant to. It's a quiet feeling, but it's one of the best feelings in woodworking, because you're not just holding two pieces of wood together. You're using the same logic that kept a pharaoh's chair intact for 3 millennia. You're building something that could outlast you. That's what the craft was always supposed to feel like. If you want to go deeper, into more joints, more techniques, more projects that actually push your skills forward, the link is in the comments. Take a look when you get a chance. And if you found this useful, share it with someone who's just getting started. Because the best thing about woodworking is that it's never too late to build something you're proud of.